so much.
All right, welcome back to the show. Let's talk about mink farming in British Columbia now. In the news again this week, there's a third outbreak of COVID-19 on a mink farm in British Columbia. That has now have some animal rights groups and other organizations calling for this fur farming industry to be shut down. The Humane Society of Canada, the Fur Bearers Alliance, the BC SPCA, and the Union of BC Indian Chiefs all calling for BC mink farms to be shut down after a third outbreak of COVID-19. Let's discuss now with my guest, Alan Herscovici. He is a researcher with truthaboutfur.com, former vice president of the Fur Council of Canada. And I'm pleased to welcome him back to the show. Alan, thank you for coming on.
Hi there. Good to speak to you again, Mike.
Thanks a lot for doing this. I'm sure this is not the news you and your organization were hoping to hear here in BC with another outbreak of COVID on a mink farm. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, for sure, it's the farmers are obviously concerned, but from a public point of view, it's showing that the system that's been put in place is actually working. These mink had not shown sickness, but there was random testing. In other words, they've been taking samples of mink, from blood tests from mink from different farms systematically and testing, and that's how they found that there was one that tested positive. So immediately the farm was quarantined. And that's the way they've been controlling it successfully. The other two cases we had in BC back in 2020, and the cases there's been in a number of states in the United States. There's, in all, in the last year, there's been about 16 farms in the United States, and they use the same protocol. If the mink is identified positive, the farm is quarantined. In other words, we limit any movement in and out of the farm and allow it to burn itself out, basically, because that's what happens. We've seen if COVID gets into a mink herd, it goes through quite quickly all of the mink in the same barn, and within a week, they're mostly all have been affected. And within 2 weeks, they all show antibodies and immunity. So it goes quite quickly. So that's why the quarantine's put in place to keep it from spreading. But, the CDC in the United States, Dr. Fauci, whose name we know because of, reporting about, COVID in people, has said they do not consider this to be a risk, a public health risk. It just has to be managed, and it's the same way it's being managed in British Columbia.
Okay, so this is the third outbreak. When we see an outbreak like this with just one animal testing positive on a farm, what happens to all the mink in that farm? Like you mentioned, there's a quarantine, but are the mink themselves, are they destroyed or euthanized, or what happens?
No, not necessarily, because what they've been seeing is most mink we've been seeing up till now, most mink may show no symptoms whatsoever. They don't ever really seem sick. Like with people, what's being seen is it's mostly older mink. Some mink have been kept many years as breeders. It's the older mink that sometimes get sick and some die. But many of the young mink never show any signs whatsoever, and come out the other end in a few weeks. They have antibodies, they're immune. The other thing that's important, too, is that there's now been a vaccine developed for mink in the United States. Wow. They're beginning vaccination in the United States, and we're hoping very soon in June, hopefully, to begin vaccinating, mink in Canada. But wow. So, that will really be the best solution. But meanwhile, I think you've got to give some credit to the farmers here because, this is only the third case that's been found in over a year across all of Canada. So it shows that the various, biosecurity precautionary principle that's been put in place, the care that they're taking has been working because it's been very few cases.
Okay, how many? There's been three mink farms in BC affected. How many mink farms are there in British Columbia total?
There's about 13. I think 8 larger ones. The more serious ones, maybe 13 in all. And these are all more or less in the same region. But the care is being taken. Obviously, the farmers are concerned because they don't want to lose, animals. As we know, in all these cases, it's been transmitted from people. It's happening, where we have a lot of COVID among human population, it can get through to the mink. And we've seen it that mink are susceptible to many respiratory viruses. Even our flu, our regular flu, farmers already have been careful. Like with much animal production, you always have to try to, be careful to protect, the animals from infections from wildlife or from people.
Okay, so you're saying that this is evidence that the system is working in containing these outbreaks, but the critics of the industry are saying actually the opposite. They're saying that this just shows that the government has failed to prevent these outbreaks on these farms, and that therefore they should be shut down. We saw a coalition of groups here in British Columbia this week with some high-profile people, including an infectious disease specialist at Vancouver General Hospital, going public and saying, look, you know, the risk here is too great of spread of this disease. These farms should be shut down. Animal rights groups, of course, criticizing the industry as well. What do you say to them?
Well, look, with all, you know, the animal rights groups, the groups like Fur Bearers in Vancouver, I mean, they, in the SPCA, BC SPCA, have been against fur in general for years and years and years. There's nothing new there. I think it's just unfortunate and shameful, frankly, to be jumping on and spreading fears in a case like this to try to, you know, promote their own agenda, which is they happen to be against fur. That's their right. Nobody's forced to wear fur. But that's a long way from talking about trying to, you know, shut down an industry. When we had swine flu in the pork industry, we don't shut down pig farming. We don't stop eating pork. When we had, avian flu in chicken populations, we don't shut down chicken farms. We manage it. Public health authorities, the agriculture department, with the farmers manage it successfully, and that's what's being done here. But of course, animal rights groups jump on it. The one case of this latest press release it's concerning is that we see the Union of Indian Chiefs has jumped in here. And I hope they understand what they've gotten involved in, who they've gotten in bed with, because, these same animal rights groups are against hunting and trapping as well, which is important to many, First Nations communities.
Okay.
So, I wonder whether they really understand what they've gotten into. And they're mentioning that, they don't do fur farming, and that's true. First Nations don't generally do fur farming, although there are some Métis fur farmers. But, the Cree in James Bay, Quebec, in the past did have a pilot project of fur farming some years back. But that's neither here nor there. Nobody's forced to wear fur, to buy fur. And the experts, like Dr. Fauci and the CDC and the Canadian Public Health do not consider that that this is a public health.
What do you say? What do you say to the critics of the industry who say that the industry is inhumane, that it is unconscionable to keep these animals in confined small cages for their entire lives, not allowed to roam outside, not allowed to do the things they would do in the natural environment, like running around or swimming or making nests or finding mates in the wild? Yeah. What do you say to all the criticism?
Yeah. Well, look, I mean, that's the criticism that these groups are making of all animal agriculture now, of course. There's been lots of research. Mink are well on farms. Anybody who claims that they're being treated cruelly or that they're suffering has clearly never been on a mink farm, and either doesn't know the truth or is not telling the truth. I've been on many mink farms in Canada, the States, and Europe, and, mink are well. These are not wild animals. That's another thing there's a misunderstanding. They'll always say, the animal rights groups, they're keeping wild animals in cages. These are not wild animals. Mink have been domesticated, have been raised on farms in Canada for over 100 years. They're significantly different than wild mink. They're twice the size. They're not as ferocious. They've been raised on farms in these pens, and they thrive there. Now, they don't have as much room to roam, that's true, but they have plenty of room to move around. They also don't have to worry about predators. They also don't have to worry about finding dinner. They also don't have to worry about certain diseases in the wild. It's always a trade-off when we domesticate animals. There's a balance. But to claim that mink are being raised cruelly is simply not true.
Okay, so when you say that, for someone who has said that this is a cruel industry, that those are people who have not been on a mink farm. So Dr. Sarah Dubois, who is a chief scientific officer with the BC SPCA this week, said that she has been on these farms. She has seen the conditions firsthand, and she says this week, I can attest that the practices are inherently inhumane. So that's her opinion.
That's her opinion, clearly. I'm not going to say she's a liar, but I said on many farms, the mink are in good condition. There's codes of practice which have been developed by veterinarians, animal scientists, animal welfare people. Have developed these codes of practice like there is for other animal agriculture in Canada, the same. These are the codes against which the farms are evaluated. BC mink farms are licensed by the BC Department of Agriculture. They are inspected annually, at least annually, by Department of Agriculture authorities to be sure that the codes of practice are being followed. But aside from that, let's remember that mink farmers have every reason to ensure that their mink are getting excellent care and nutrition, because that's simply the only way that you can raise, good quality fur that you need to compete in the market. And Canadian mink is always in the top prices. We're not a major producer on a world scale, but our farmers produce mink that gets the highest prices always, and that's because it's the best quality, and you only get that by providing excellent care to your animals. So aside from the fact that mink farmers are people, I don't think people understand how some of these criticisms and the things that are said so blithely, how insulting and hurtful they are to the real people. You have family farms in BC. They're working to protect their animals, you can be sure. And it's frankly, quite shameful, the things that are just being said. I don't think we could speak against any other group of people, so blithely, making these kind of accusations, as if these people are immoral, these farm families. I care very much.
Alan, thank you for coming on the show once again today. I appreciate it.
Always a pleasure, Mike. And if nothing else, that gives us a chance, this situation, to talk a little bit about mink farming that people often don't understand.
Sure. Absolutely. I want to get both sides of it.
That's the good side of it, yeah.
All right, welcome back to the show. You heard my conversation there with Alan Herscovici from the Fur Council of Canada. Let's get the other side of it here on mink farming in BC. Rebeka Breder is an animal rights lawyer at Breder Law. I'm pleased to welcome her back. Hi, Rebeka.
Hi, Mike. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, you bet. I know you heard that interview. What did you think?
Oh, yeah, I did. And I can't believe that he's accusing of critics like Fur Bears and BCSPCA and myself that it's shameful that we're spreading this fear about COVID-19, the link between COVID-19 and fur farms. What is absolutely shameful is that this industry and this government is putting the human population at risk, a further risk of another pandemic, just because of this inherently cruel and dying industry. It is unbelievable. I mean, keeping thousands of animals in close quarters, like the mink farming industry does, is ground zero for another pandemic where viruses can and have spread between animals to people. It's not, we know this. It's a fact. It's happened. It just happened now. There's a reason why France, UK, Ireland, Slovakia, Norway, and other countries have implemented an immediate phasing out and an eventual outright ban of fur farming. It is absolutely... I mean, I was infuriated when I heard that. I'm not going to lie, because that is what's shameful. It's not that we're spreading this fear. It actually happened and is happening. And let me just address another point about, the ethics of it. And when Alan was talking about how, these mink, they're treated well. They don't have to worry about food. They have room to move around. And there's nothing inhumane about this industry. Well, I encourage your listeners, go online. Just Google how these mink are kept. They are kept crammed in wire cages. There's no grass under their feet. There's nothing natural about this environment. They die by either being gassed to death or electrocuted. I'm sorry if there are kids in the car, but these animals are killed by being electrocuted through their anus. So if that is something that you call humane, then we obviously have a very different idea of what humane is.
Okay, Rebeka, yes? Sam, I just want to squeeze in a couple of phone calls here from a couple people who are waiting here, so let's do that real quick. Rick on the line in Delta. Rick, what do you think? Go ahead.
Well, I'll tell you my experience. On one occasion, I was trucking for a friend of mine. I took Phil into a mink farm in Langley, South Langley, and as I drove by where they're warehoused, it was like they're kept in boxes marginally larger than a mandarin orange box. It's absolutely disgusting that they live their lives in these wire boxes. And, COVID-19 aside, that this guy would talk about morality or ethics is a joke.
Okay, thank you for that. Well, I guess, I don't know, it is a disturbing picture that you paint, obviously, Rebeka, but, I guess, how far would you take it though? Like, would you shut down like all animal husbandry industries, like, chicken farms, pig farms, cattle like when
I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole.
Well,
now,
I mean, like at some point, I guess you have to go down that rabbit hole because it's kind of like, are we going to pick and choose which animal industry should be shut down and which should be allowed to operate?
No, I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole. I mean, what I am going to say is that we're talking about the mink farming industry right now and the fur farming industry, and that's what has to be shut down. We have evidence that it's a grave danger to human health, let alone the ethics about keeping animals and torturing them their entire lives. So, but what I do want to say is that I do appreciate how this could come across that we're insulting these people, that we're insulting these farmers, as Alan said. We're not. Yeah. My intention is certainly, like I'm sure that obviously these people have families. Obviously these individuals who are working on these farms think that they're doing some good. And I'm not saying that those individuals are bad people, even though I don't really understand how you could do that type of work where you're literally torturing an animal. But it's the industry itself that has to just be outright banned. It was starting with a phase out, because it would be unrealistic to say as of tomorrow, you're all out of work. So it's just that's the way it has to be. It's society. We're evolving into realizing that there are many alternatives to fur. There's no need to be torturing animals to wear fur anymore.
Okay, Rebeka, thanks for coming on today.
Thanks, Mike.
Keeping up with the flood of news every day